Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Veronica Chapman-Smith, Director of Community Initiatives for Opera Philadelphia. I want to welcome you to Reimagine the Opera Canon Part 2, an event that is part of Opera Philadelphia's Reflection and Revision series. I use she, her pronouns, and for those of you with varying vision levels, I am a Black woman with shoulder-length black relaxed hair and glasses. Tonight, I am wearing a coral dress and a gray sweater and my favorite beaded necklace. Reflection and Revision is a free series filled with education, conversation, and lectures around Opera Philadelphia's streaming digital season. During our conversation, please feel free to ask questions via the chat, and we invite all to participate in our conversation. Tonight, we have a wonderful panel of musicians, artists here joining me with this conversation. Tonight, we have Emily Sung, Melissa Dunphy, Michael Mohammed, and Tanyaradzwa Tawengwa. Please, why don't you all turn on your cameras and come on into the Zoom room. Hello, it is great to see you all. Like before, we're going to have a conversation where we kind of delve into looking into problematic areas of the canon and think about new ideas and way in which we can make this space more inclusive. But first, I want everyone to be able to give you a chance to introduce themselves and let you know a little bit about them. So tonight we're going to start with Emily Sung, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I am a 5'3" Asian American woman. Used to have pretty short hair, but because of the pandemic, I now have very long, dark brown hair. It's tied up, and I'm wearing my favorite brown Rothko sweater. I am a choir director. I used to be the assistant chorus master at Opera Philadelphia a couple years ago, and I'm currently a doctoral student in choral music at the University of Southern California.
Hi, I'm Melissa Dunphy, calling in from Philadelphia. I have silver dyed hair in a Heidi braid and a black and white striped sweater, and I am wearing earrings made of cow teeth that I found on an archaeological dig. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a composer. I teach composition and orchestration currently at Rutgers University in New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Michael Mohammed, he, him. I am a Black man with my COVID goatee, which is black and white, as is my shirt. I teach at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music at San Jose State University and the College of Marin in the San Francisco Bay Area as a stage director, and I'm also a performer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tanyaradzwa Tawengwa. I am a Black woman. Right now, I'm wearing a black turtleneck. I have long locks and clear framed glasses, and also these earrings that are from my favorite auntie who passed away when I was 9. And I am a composer, a singer, and a scholar. I'm finishing up my doctorate in voice performance at the University of Kentucky. And I am next year going to be a Hodder Fellow with Princeton University. So that's very exciting. And I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you all for being here. I'm very happy that we have a chance to have a second conversation. So why don't we just dive right in and see where the conversation leads us. So as part of our planning around this idea, one of the ideas that planning around this conversation, one of the ideas that came up was the idea of the origins of opera. And I think it might have been Tanyaradzwa who brought it up about the fact that opera was formed and cultivated through a patronage system, and that its roots were created in elitism. And so there was questions about how do we create space of inclusion when the origins of an art form were so entrenched in elitism. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that question.
I'll jump in. That question came up actually when Emily was talking about the opera house, and really offering a comparison to opera and community theater, and the ways in which artists sometimes outside of the house don't feel like they have the agency or the ability to simply say, hey, I'm putting up this community opera, and come audition, it'll be great, you'll be fine in it. And so specifically what I was referring to in terms of the patronage system as well is just the significance of the opera house. And one of the quotes I used was, I really forget the scholar. While we talk, I might find them and put it in the chat. But there's a scholar who wrote that opera is not a blank slate. That actually the opera stage and the opera house it's a very active space in which the dominions of power are played out. And so, we have operas where we see those power dynamics happening between different groups of people, right? And I know Butterfly came up, and Pinkerton is an interesting person to think about in that regard. And so, yes, it's really thinking about these histories and how some of these kind of formational ideas are still with us, and the fact that it's very important to interrogate everything if the goal is indeed to create an inclusive and equitable space.
Yes, 100% agree with that. And I wonder if Emily, since this whole idea about kind of growing back to the roots of the patronage system kind of came out because you were talking about the relationship between like opera, the opera house, and that space. And I think you said something about like, there's this notion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's this notion about like, only good opera happens in the opera house. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm taking this wonderful arts leadership class right now with Ken Foster at USC. And one of the ideas that we have been discussing this past week is how artists of all different kinds have a tendency to define art in terms of the space in which it happens. And this is more and less true of different kinds of art, but it's very, very true of opera. We think of opera as what happens inside the opera house. And opera that happens outside the opera house is somehow like less opera, or I wouldn't even say less good opera. We think of it as not as opera, if we use opera as an adjective, as the opera that happens inside the opera house. We're like, oh, it's very cool that those opera singers staged something so edgy in the parking lot behind the Dunkin' Donuts. How weird, like, is it opera or not? We have that question once we take it out of the space. So to Tanyaradzwa's point, the space of the opera house invokes all of these power dynamics. A lot of them they're historical. Like we think, I remember Tanyaradzwa, you brought up the boxes where, royalty and fancy diplomats and so on, you would pay a huge sum in order to go to the opera house and be seen attending this elitist event, no matter how fluent you are in the repertoire and the language of opera itself. So I think that's something that we still hear echoes of that today when we go to the opera, when we experience opera, even opera on demand. It evokes that space so powerfully, and it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I love the Academy of Music. It invokes just such strong feelings of inspiration and awe and beauty, and it's such a grand space. It's a space where you walk in and you think, oh, great art can happen here. But we also have this responsibility to interrogate what are our assumptions about what constitutes great art, because it's not neutral, as Tanyaradzwa says. It's not like any art by anybody featuring anybody can be considered great art. It's like, no, when we think great art can happen here, we're thinking about a certain kind of great art made by certain people for certain purposes. So I don't know, how do we escape that?
I think that this is a really important question, and also a really difficult question. How do we uncouple opera from elitism? Because I think it's gone beyond like uncoupling opera from an opera house now. Like we've been so entrenched in this cultural marker that now even no matter where you see opera, it's supposed to be a cultural marker of elitism. And you can see this where in a nice restaurant, if they happen to have an opera singer come in to sing in the restaurant, that makes the restaurant higher class, right? There's this coupling of opera and high class, highbrow. You can even see it. I mean, this is a huge example. Which politicians use opera singers in inauguration ceremonies, and what is that supposed to mean? And most recently, I think, with political use of opera in American politics, it is like very clear to me that we are linking to money, to class, and we are linking specifically to white European history. So, we all in the opera world have to examine the fact that even outside of our rarefied environments, opera is being used as a cultural signifier for racism, classism, sexism to some degree as well. If you look at how opera treats female characters and what songs are being sung at these events, we need to grapple with that. We can't just say, oh, I love the music, because it's not just about the music.
And can I jump in about because going back to this idea of space, and I think exactly what you're saying, Melissa, I think is also who holds the keys, both figurative and literal, to these spaces and to the spaces. A political space, I think, is also that question of who are we inviting in? What opera singer are we inviting into this event who has to sing Un Bel Dì, which, what are we waiting for on that one fine day? So I think there's all these things that get mixed up in the trying to uncouple also means democratizing space. And then really that, to me, that just means widening conversations. And how do we maybe pass around the keys so that maybe, to keep going with that idea, but who gets to hold the keys, who gets to open the doors, who gets to have these conversations, and what would happen if we democratize space and widened who got to say, have a say in what the conversations are.
Well, it's interesting that you just said democratize the space, because I know in part of our conversation, I think you were the one that brought up the idea of like, does the digital platform help to democratize this space, the art form? And I actually thought about this for a long while, because I think I'm having my own like cognitive disconnect between like the love of the beauty of the sounds I hear, and then some of the harm that has happened within this space. And like, I wonder if we have more stories that reflect my experience, will I not have this cognitive dissonance that's going on? And by democratizing the space and the art form, will that then lead to having some relief in that space? So I don't know how you all are feeling about the digital platform. I mean, I know we have two composers, a conductor and a performer on here, and educators, but like, how are you seeing this digital space work?
I would like to answer that, but also answer something that came up before. Is that okay, Veronica? I want to talk about a little bit about the uncoupling and democratizing the space, and looking at models of where else opera is thriving. And so I'm from Zimbabwe, and I think that Southern Africa, and going through classical music education in Southern Africa, really gave me a completely different view of opera, because the people who are singing opera in Southern Africa right now would not be considered the elite class. It definitely is, music of the people. And I think the reason, opera resonates for us is because we define opera as just simply storytelling through singing. And this is something that is so much in our culture and in our ancestry that, people love this idea of telling stories on stage. And so you see companies doing things like taking works that could be described as canonical and translating them into Xhosa, into Zulu, into, really creating these really claiming and reworking the space in a way that makes it for the people. And so when I kind of get discouraged, if I do, in this space, I always think about home. And I think about the space where one, we're talking about brown bodies being the majority in the space. And really, I'm always so excited by the amount of creativity that comes out in the way that people are reclaiming. There's an opera about Winnie Mandela, just the kinds of topics that come up. It's very exciting. So I almost wonder, part of this discourse, as sometimes we tend to focus a lot on Europe and America. I think it's also now important to open up, right, just how we're looking at this taking place on the globe. And for me, Southern Africa is an important space to include. We have Pretty Yende for that, who really proves that. Like, how incredible is she? And many other fantastic singers coming out from the continent. So there's that. In terms of the digital sphere, I mean, it lets us be here right now. And I think that there's definitely a different kind of connection and a different uh, breadth of connection throughout, again, the globe, which is quite encouraging. I think we are all being challenged to think in new ways and redefine things, which is also very good. Like I said, we must interrogate everything. And I think, I think it will be very emotional for us all when we are in some kind of shared physical space, whatever it is we create and name. Yeah.
Did anybody else want? Oh, there you go, Michael. Sorry.
Sorry, it took me a second. 100%. I think interrogating these ideas is what's going to move us all forward. And I think this digital space that we find ourselves won't be going away very quickly, because, and I think for me, I know that I recently feel like I'm starting to embrace what is possible in this space. And I think the idea of democratizing, in the sense, or allowing the digital space to democratize what we do, is that, like we're doing in this very moment, of having conversations that does question, a conversation that questions what things looked like before, and perhaps what they will look like when we are in this emotionally charged shared physical space. Can the digital space lead us there? Hopefully. Can a new idea of digital space live alongside what happens when we're back to be in physical space? I think if we can really let one thing amplify the other, it could be very, very exciting. It could be really powerful. You could really, really find new ways to express this art form.
I think honestly, it's forcing opera to catch up with all the other art forms that have been using the digital space effectively for decades, like literally decades. And it's tied in actually with the whole elitism thing, because, since television became a thing, and even to a certain extent, movies, films, that's been coded in society as a pop cultural thing for everyone. And I think that that's a big reason why opera generally has ignored that, to its detriment, in my opinion, when compared with other art forms. So, for example, pop music has been using videos and, music videos, MTV, whole channels of music videos, and for 40 years going on, And yet in opera, the closest we can come is, the Met on Demand up until recently, which is a film of a stage show. Like they're beautifully done, they're beautifully shot, but it's like just adapting the stage show for this medium rather than going all in and thinking about creating a film. It's like a poor substitute for being in the theater kind of thing. So I feel like this pandemic, there is no silver lining to the pandemic. I'm not saying that this is, it's a positive, net positive. It is not. But it is forcing us to reconsider why this has happened and how do we not do that. So, I think at the end of the day, we need to hang on to that, not in fear of another pandemic, but because it's better for us to let go of that idea and get in with everyone else.
And can I also just say, and sorry, Veronica, but also using video and technology in stage work is behind an opera than in other theatrical art forms, because even going to a rock concert, they've been using interactive technology for a while, where it still feels so nouveau to use it in opera. Um, and I think it is a part of this catching up that we can do coming out of this.
Yeah, and I want to kind of loop back a little bit around to the idea of the pop culture and it being for everybody, because I know in part of our conversation, looping back to one of the thing that Emily brought up about like community theater and like the idea that you would go down the street and see a listing for a community theater thing and say, well, that belongs to me. I can go into that, even if you have no formal training in that space. But that is not the same with opera. And that kind of leaves us in a space again of like elitism, othering of it's like whether you've had the classical formal training, if you're thinking in that space, thinking of opera in that way, which many people do. And I didn't know, Emily, if you wanted to talk a little bit about like your ideas around the virtuosic nature of opera and how it sometimes plays into this space.
Yeah, totally. I really hate being on Zoom all day. I have to say, like, I'm with Melissa. There's no silver lining. The pandemic is terrible. It's so bad all around. Everything is bad. But I think it's making us ask a lot of questions which are really overdue. It's how does technology, like, can there be more of a place for opera in a digital world? Why haven't we done this to date? What do we stand to gain from just asking these questions and focusing? What this is really forcing us to do is focus on real people right now. It's like, okay, we can't just continue measuring our art by these great historic benchmarks, the great performance of so and so in the year so and so in the opera house. You had to be there to experience it. Like, there's no video of it. The video is terrible anyway. Like, you just had to be there. So I think it's just making us ask all these questions. And to what you said, Veronica, about the difference between opera and theater, I think this is on a lot of people's minds right now. Like, why is it that theater has moved so much farther ahead in terms of allowing all kinds of theater to be accessible to so many people? There's so many different angles, so many different entry points. You can be somebody who just loves watching movies. That's a way of appreciating theater. You can be part of your community theater company. You can be a techie. Like, there are just so many entry points in a way that it's very unusual for a community opera company to achieve that in the US, at least, and probably in Europe. So yeah, the story I told when we got together on Tuesday was I have a very dear friend in Rhode Island, Chris Simpson. He runs the Contemporary Theater Company. They're wonderful. If you're in Rhode Island, go check him out. And I was there the year that he started this company, and people from the community were coming in to audition for roles, and he was like, "Dad, you should audition." And he got his dad to come by, and his dad had never been in a play before in his life, and he came in and he gave a great audition. So he was like, "Dad, you're in the play. I'm gonna cast you," and it was great. And I look back on that moment and think, on what planet could that possibly happen in the world of opera? In the US and in Europe, I don't know. Maybe Tanyaradzwa, maybe you could speak to other modes of access to the operatic arts in Southern Africa, but it's unheard of. It's absolutely unheard of here.
I mean, there's so many things that I'm also still in the process of thinking about and untangling in my own mind and trying to understand where I land. But one of the things is I remember as a teenager, I really used to think of opera as the Olympics of singing. And in some ways I still do. I have a lot of respect for just the amount of work, singers put in in this art form. And then I also, now, especially with my colleague and collaborator Flannery Cunningham, and we're working to build our own company, really expanding what virtuosity in voice production means, right, for any style of vocal expressivity, because I also come from other cultural vocal expressive styles that define their virtuosity in their own way, and making space for that. And so, I do think that there is a space in the world where we all convene to see people who do things excellently, whether it's in sports or in the arts or etc. And that aspect of, going to be wowed by something amazing, by seeing someone who has spent time with craft for years and years and just being blown away, I love that. I really, really do. And so, when I think of kind of an elite performer, or like an elite athlete, it's just, we're using the same word elite, but to me, it has two different meanings. So specifically, when I'm thinking about elitism in opera, it's not really about the elite performer and the amount of work and training. I respect that person, actually. It's about kind of the overhanging atmosphere of exclusion, right? That then comes with the sense of like, okay, this space is like this, and for you to be in this space, this is how you have to be. And I think of, some really honestly unsavory experiences I've had in the house. So for example, when I was a student at Princeton, we went to Germany, and we went to the opera in Leipzig. We went to go see, what were we seeing? A Tosca. And, I was there and I had my locks up, but it was in a kind of like a ponytail. And it was really an empty day. And then there was an older German woman behind me, and midway through, she just kind of started tapping my shoulder, and I turned around and she was speaking to me, and I was trying to understand what she was saying, because I was there as a German student, like language student, and I was still not so good. But ultimately she was saying if I came with hair so distracting, I shouldn't come to the opera house, and that I can't come into a space like this with hair like this, and that it's unacceptable. So that was an experience, where I feel like this idea of who should even be in the space and how you should look in the space. And I just remember going to the toilet and crying. And, it's just those kinds of things. But then I also do remember, on the flip side, recently, 2 years ago, going to see Pretty sing at the Met, and going for those student rush tickets at the beginning, and getting to the ticket counter and being like, oh my God, I'm so excited, I love Pretty, I just love her work, I love getting to see her, and I know her. And then the person working was like, you know what, I'm going to get you the best seat. And they got me the best seat to go see her sing. And so this sense that somebody who has made it in now creates space for us to be welcomed exactly as we are, so that's what I'm interested in, is why is it, why do you walk into the opera house sometimes and feel stressed, like you're like, oh my God, if my phone rings, I'm dying. I don't want to be that person, because there's just something in the house that makes it seem like so I'm interested in how the space can relax, how people can feel at home, and how the people who are populating the space can kind of reflect the world that we live in.
That is wonderful. It reminds me of this comedian that I watched a little video of, and she was talking about, you walk and go see like the symphony or the opera, and they have that like repressed joy where they're like, oh, so great. But she like wants to be like, wow, this is amazing. Look at this. Did you hear them? Go oboes, go bassoons. Like she really like gets lots of joy from it. But like when you go to see classical music, we are often in repressed joy. And that what you just said really speaks to me in that way. That is something that I think really we're struggling with, is trying to figure out how to create a sense of belonging within a space, and what does that really mean, and how does that look like. And for myself, I also struggle with, like, I think that there's power and agency that goes along with that sense of belonging that is necessary, that we're still kind of struggling with as an art form and as a society, of like, what does that really look like? So I wondered if we might like shift a little bit, a tiny bit, because part of the other things that came up in our conversation was like, what does it look like to create an opera that doesn't have harm or mitigates harm? You know, much of the canon has problematic elements within it, and how do we move forward in a way that is thoughtful and considerate um, within an art form that holds so many treasures by many? I mean, we'll put that qualifier on it. To do opera that does no harm. Like, we'll put a general statement and then maybe we'll get a little bit deeper after that.
Can I jump on that? Because I feel like it really speaks to the heart of what Tanyaradzwa was just saying, which is that there's elitism and then there's elitism. There's the elitism of this human did something just so incredible with their voice, with their body. I have so much respect for that. The amount of work, the amount of training, it's like a superhuman feat. And then there's the elitism of this only belongs to some people and it doesn't belong to you. Or it doesn't belong to you unless you are elevated enough to appreciate it. And we can have one without the other, but often we sort of have both with opera. And I think it's the question of, does this story belong to you? Are you allowed to weigh in on it and have an opinion on it? And if you have an opinion on it, is anybody going to listen to you, or is anybody going to change their art to make room for you in this space? And if not, then how much room do you have to just appreciate the incredible feat of art that you're looking at? I feel like the answer is not much.
And so for me, as someone who teaches voice as well, one of the things that I've been thinking about and grappling with is this idea of healthy singing, because when we, in our sort of collective idea of healthy singing, it often comes to a European, either bel canto or German idea of what that is. And I wonder if we can reframe healthy singing. And I think also this is, and I'm a long way in, but I think this is also to what we're talking about here too, of the opera industry, opera spaces. Can healthy go beyond reducing risk and actually be beneficial to the people who are involved with it? And I think that's even a question that we all can ask ourselves, that if we're looking at these pieces, and as Emily said, if we're looking at these works and the people who get to participate in the work, is there a way that we can make it therefore beneficial? Not just doing no harm, not just reducing risk, but actually elevating it in such a way that we can all appreciate the elite singer who is doing this incredible amount of work and has trained this incredible amount, the conductor who knows the score inside and out, but can we reach forward and reach back at the same time? And I think that's the position that I think more of us could really question. In our agency, can we reach in both directions simultaneously?
When I hear the phrase do no harm, I think specifically in my head, I interpret that as essentially don't punch down, right? Like that's the term in comedy when you have a comedy set, or when you're talking about jokes. There's a maxim now for comics who aren't trying to be the most politically incorrect jerks in the room, that when you make a joke that makes fun of someone, you should be making jokes that punch up, that that are cutting to the people in power. Like that's your job as a comedian. If you're making jokes that make fun of people who are marginalized, then you are ethically in the wrong. Like you're subverting, you're twisting the whole point of comedy, and that's in some respects actually, I think you can extrapolate that to a lot of art. Like, what is the purpose of art in the first place? Is it to maintain the status quo? Is it to be propaganda that upholds what is up and what is down? Or is it to speak truth to power? Is it to empower the people who listen? Is it to bring people up? So it's like, do no harm in my head doesn't mean that you enter the space and like there's literally no criticism of anything going on within the space. It means examining the dynamics of the society in which you live. So that's like one part of my what that question brings up to me. The other part is, oh, the idea that opera is really just about the music. You hear this all the time, right? People who are like, well, yes, this opera is about something that's really objectionable, but I really just like it because of the music. So that's the definition of opera, that the music can stand on its own. To which I say then, okay, if the music can stand on its own, then we should be perfectly allowed to change all of the words and all of the plot lines, and you shouldn't care. But when you do change the words and the plot lines, those same purists get really, really mad, which is why I'm like, yeah, like you can't have it both ways. If you think that opera is actually about the music, then we should be able to rewrite the canon any way we want, and you don't have a leg to stand on. If you object to that, then we can see that it's not just about the music anymore. So I'm just putting that grenade out there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think comments like that are exactly the opposite of doing no harm, because some people can look at really racist content and say, oh, it's a little bit racist, but the music is so beautiful. And a lot of people, we can't look past the racist content. The moment there's a racist content on stage, you're doing harm. So the music isn't going to be beautiful anymore.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about the idea of yeah, it reminds me of the fact that when we were doing this show with the Bearded Ladies Cabaret, we're always talking about like, can you take away the harm? Can you have something beautiful with a harmful person and still make it does it still have value? Does it still something that we want to have in the world? And so I think about like this same kind of disconnect with Wagner. I feel like that conversation comes up a lot because he is harmful, and like, should we be still doing Wagner's work within the world? There is a question from the audience, but I personally was actually doing a little bit of Googling because I was not sure about what happened, because I don't know everything, obviously, because I'm learning in this space. But we have a question. If there were any thoughts about Paris Opera production of Aida and just what that just went up.
I know a little bit about this, and only because I saw it in a singers forum this morning. So apparently Paris Opera is staging Aida right now. They have 3 puppeteers puppeteering the character of the body of Aida, and a white soprano singing the role that the puppet is representing. A thing to note, you can see the puppeteers on the stage, like they're not dressed in blacks. So one of them is of African descent, is Black. The other 2 are not. And there is currently, like right today, debate raging about this staging, because I'm generalizing here, but some people want to see this as a way of getting around the racist tropes that are in Aida by using a puppet, and other people are like, this doubles down on the racism because you are literally dehumanizing her by making the character a puppet that is controlled by these puppeteers, and you've also figured out a way to have 3 white people and only 1 Black person puppeteer, like create the character of a Black woman on the stage. So that's just the Cliff's notes.
Is the idea that the puppet is Black, but the singer?
Yes, because it has dreads.
Right.
Tanyaradzwa should say something.
I know, because I know this came up in our last talk, and yes, please go ahead.
I just want to say I have not seen the production, so I need to see it before I can really, put thoughts down, and maybe, it's be something to watch and write about next. I will say that when it's broken. That's my stance on these things, and to look at these 19th century works, that were written. To me the important thing is, what was the intention when it was written. I'm a composer myself, and we cannot now 100 years later try to sanitize racist intentions. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so to me, that's where the brokenness begins. It begins with the pen. And if the pen was broken, I don't care how many puppets you build, it's broken. That's what I believe. And so I don't know. I have to see it, Jesse. I have to see the piece. But already, just based on Melissa's Cliff Notes version, I'm not having the best response in my body, to be honest, because again, it's broken, and the fact that it's broken, and we're seeking to, find all of these very bizarre solutions. It's that's exactly the issue, right? And I think part of me, kind of what makes me feel the affront even more is, again, it's spaces not really understanding the harm of racism, for as long as the people driving these spaces are not people who experience it, but are from a group who perpetrates it. And it, it's yeah, it's just, it gets a little frustrating at a certain point, um yeah, that's really where I am.
The sort of the hammer question, I don't know if that's the right phrase I'm looking for, but the question to me that smashes all the other questions is this seriously the solution, like their way of getting around the fact that they should just hire a Black woman to sing the role? You know what I mean? Like the convoluted route that they took to avoid just having a Black soprano sing the role. That these are, this is a strange issue. And also think about the fact that we're having this conversation on the background of, very recently, Emmanuel Macron was in the press saying that American issues of social justice, such as Black Lives Matter, are ripping the structure of the fabric of French society apart. That our progressive ideas are damaging Europe. So this is the water that we're swimming in right now.
And it makes me think about, like, what does it say about us as an art form, that we keep having to have this conversation about blackface, and whether it's a puppet or whether you're actually painting someone a different color. There needs to be some investigation, as Tanyaradzwa was saying, and like serious, true investigation about what is going on. And I'm glad that we're talking about Europe, because as part of our conversation, we started to talk about the idea that there are seems to be like these two camps almost, when we're talking about mainstream opera, where we have our ideas about like what is not acceptable and what we're trying to grapple with. But often when we go in and talk to some of our European colleagues, sometimes they don't always understand the historical and cultural things that have happened within America, and how do we kind of navigate that space. And I think it was beautiful at one point, because we had this moment where we're like, but this is a global issue. This is not something that only happened. Anti-Blackness and the objectification of bodies that were not white European bodies is not just something specific to America. This is a global issue, and this is something that we all have ownership in, as in like each continent, each country, and it's something that we need to really talk about. And I personally start to lose language and lose words, because I get so upset when I hear people say like, well, it's the Americans, it's their problem, it's not ours.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm like, I have to jump in right there. No, it's not just an American problem. The Europeans invented racism. I mean, honestly, it feels quite personal to me, because again, I am coming from someone who was born in a former British colony, and these things, these ideas are still, I mean, the continent was cut up because European white men sat around a table in 1884 and what were looking for a space to extract labor and to spread capitalism. And then they were already extracting bodies. Like I cannot sit and be like, Europeans are ignorant to the effect of racism. And again, reading Said's Culture and Imperialism, they invented imperialism and racism on the operatic stage. And so there's no excuse. There's no excuse. None.
And I agree 100%. And it'll take true courage for us to like move forward. And that was one of the things that came up in our conversation was like, what does the word courage mean in this space? And how do we use our personal courage and our collective courage and power to like really create a space where it's healing, using art as a healing space. When Michael was talking, it reminded me of when our last conversation, Tanyaradzwa brought up the idea of like restorative art and restorative justice within opera space. So I didn't know if in our last like 15 minutes, we wanted to like kind of go into the world of like trying to reimagine what it could look like and what that healing, courageous space might be.
I think there are a lot of different starting places. As Melissa said, why don't we change the words, change the stories, keep the music if you want. I'm waiting for the day when a major opera company in in the US, because I'm from the US, takes Aida and is like, okay, we'll keep the hit numbers, but we're gonna do it. We're gonna just get rid of the pyramids and the like, we're done with that. We'll have a new story. And as Tanyaradzwa said before, like our art form just focuses so much on the past, and the answer is really clear. We have to focus on the present. We need to focus on the future instead. I don't know if you wanted to talk more about that since you were the one who brought it up before.
Of course, I'm also, to everyone watching, I just got out of studying for my doctoral qualifying exams, and I spent a lot of time with Beethoven and Liszt, which was very interesting. And one of the things that I did was buy Rita Dove's poetry collection, which kind of offers a reimagining of what's now known as the Kreutzer Sonata, but was originally written for George Bridgetower, a Black violinist. And of course, there's the debate, the ongoing Beethoven is Black debate, which I think is very important. We may not have space to unpack it, but I do think, I've really been sitting with it. And I have some ideas about what Blackness actually means when we think about Beethoven, and how, in fact, yes, Beethoven was Black, but the way I'm thinking about it is a little different than, the way people just focusing on race solely are thinking about it. Maybe I'll write that next. But oh my gosh, where are we right now? Sorry, I just had 10 thoughts in my mind in 10 directions. What are we talking about?
I think we're talking about what would the courageous healing space look like.
Bridge Tower. Thank you. Listen, this is a lot. It's a vast space, and I'm trying to kind of find Occam's razor to what I'm saying. And so for one of the things that I am very interested in, like I said last time, Veronica, in thinking about restorative justice in the canon, is also taking time to prioritize the voices that were silenced and excluded from spaces even then. We have Black composers from the classical era, like Joseph Boulogne. Why is that not, why is he not circulating in canon? And I think that is such an interesting composer to grapple with. The child of a Guadeloupean slave, mother brought from Senegal. And how was he born? Was he born of rape? Like these are important things. And then to put that work on the stage, right? And it speaks the language of, the classical era, and then to interrogate it and to have audiences reckon with it. Why, I feel like audiences need to be challenged in that way. Same thing, thinking about performers like Bridge Tower, thinking about other composers at that time in Europe, in the Americas, and globally. I just think there's just so many. If you really want to do this work and put effort in, there's a way to do this without, and you would have seasons and seasons of music without having to bring back another Aida for a while.
Go ahead.
I guess in closing, I would say, I just think there's so much work that can be done first before we sit down and say like, okay, let's rewrite the words to Aida. I mean, I just think there's an urgent path that can be taken that could be really meaningful, and we could also all be transformed by it. And then maybe only then, when we've taken that path, will we have the kind of cleansed palate to be able to look at these things that we felt so married to for a long time and say, okay, is this really what we need? Maybe not. And maybe we'll be ready to release some things. And maybe that will be the healing, is the release.
There's a book that just came out last year called The Black Register by Tendai Setole, who's a South African political theorist. And he talks about the Black Register as being the ways that, he's talking about writers mostly, but he talks about the ways that under colonialism, that Black voices share a same ideas, and how there's a certain kind of thinking, especially about liberation, is understood. And that made me think about how we talk about vocal register. We talk about how high or how low something is. So that then leads to, how do we think about the way that we think collectively, especially in bending towards justice, and then how can we use our collective voices, whether as literal or figurative, toward justice. And I think, to go along with what Tanyaradzwa was just saying, I think if we are rethinking what we're putting on stage and who gets to put it on stage, and when we have this language that's connecting how we all want to move forward, I think that's could be really powerful for those of us who want to move out of another Aida and maybe rediscover a Bologna, or everyone else, and re-putting names on it, and as well as amplifying the voices who are writing right now, and especially in the present, if we're talking about how do we keep the present as part of the conversation. Because to know that we talked about the opera's obsession with the dead, how can we actually have opera's obsession with the present be part of what moves us forward out of this?
Just a little resource for people. Philip Ewell, the musicologist, on Twitter, Phil Ewell at Phil Ewell, Ewell. All this month, it's Black History Month. He is posting a series called Color Raced of Black musical artists who have been, to one extent or another, erased from what we think of as classical music, history, theory, musicology, you name it. So I would go and follow him and check out that list, because it's really eye-opening and will help you see how this has happened and how many people would be left behind.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've been having conversations not just about music, but like history in general, with a lot of my colleagues about the things that we don't learn in school, and it's essentially like, who is the dominant class are the people who get to write history, and they are the ones that get to dictate what people remember. And I'm thankful that many of us are in a space where we're starting to realize that much of our history has been lost, because I also get really upset when people are like, silo history, where it's like Black history and women's history. Like, everybody needs to know this history. Yes, it is something that is specific to my identity because I am a Black woman, but it's also something that I feel like everyone needs to know in order to move forward, as a whole human being with understanding and empathy. And so I think with having our musical history have a more complete picture, we will therefore have a better understanding moving forward. It kind of reminds me of what we were talking about before, when we were talking about the idea of genius and like who gets to qualify what genius is. And I think Tanyaradzwa may have said this, or maybe it was Emily, I'm not sure, or Melissa. It was like the idea that you don't have a complete picture of the history of our musical history. So like, how can we say this is Beethoven is genius and what somebody else wrote was not genius? And I wonder, as like a composer moving forward, and you kind of talked a little bit about this, Melissa, last time, but a composer moving forward into the world of opera, like opera in the future. Like, what do you think that could possibly look like from a writing and composing standpoint? And maybe I'll ask Tanyaradzwa too, because you are also a composer.
Yeah. I sort of feel like my entire career has been about this issue in some ways, because I feel like when I started composing 15 or so years ago, there was still this idea that writing about current topics or writing about, political issues could somehow hamper your career, right? Which is actually such a lot of crap, actually. Like, all the composers that we think of as timeless, and I talked about this last time, were writing about current issues and things that were currently wanting to explore. So for me, we have to get away from classical music in general's ossification, our worship of the past, our worship of the concept of timelessness. We have to think about giving composers the space to write about current issues, encouraging them to write about current issues. Of course, diversifying the composer pool is going to help with that, but it's not just about that. It's not just about quotas and numbers. It's about thinking about composition in a different way. I'm not trying to be the next Beethoven. I'm trying to write art that is for the 21st century in which I live. I just think, this is the starting point. I mean, I'm writing an opera right now for Oberlin that is actually about the issue that you just talked about, Veronica, of who gets to tell the stories. Those are the stories that we think of. So it's an opera about archaeology, which often seeks to discover the untold stories through objects, because the stories that get told are written down, and they're written down generally by educated white men, right? So all the stories that are lost, you have to seek them out in unusual places. So that's kind of what the opera is about. So yeah, these are the issues about time. This is like re-examining all of history, not just music, but doing it through the lens of our art form.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to just let go of what isn't working. The canon is incomplete. We're desperately in need of art that is made by people right now for the world that we're living in, and we're really we really need that. I think that these efforts to come up with an Aida with puppets and all of like these attempts come from our attachment to the canon, and that comes in large part, I think, from our business model of we need to do these blockbusters to fill the piggy bank and to make sure that we live to see another season. And I think it's just time for us to let go of that mentality, because that's not where the money really is. That's where the dying money. That's where the money that's dying out is. So the sooner we can just accept that and move on, the better.
Yeah, just going back to your question, Veronica, composition was an intentional choice to me, and I thank my father for it, because when I was growing up, my dad used to say to me, we have a proverb, and it says, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter until the lioness learns to write. So my father always told me to write. And, I come from a family of freedom fighters and revolutionaries, so I am very political, and I will always be. And I also come from a family that was actually my grandfather was the producer or the patron of the Zimbabwean arts. So any great artist who is defined as a great Zimbabwean artist was supported and nurtured by my grandfather. So I understand, this patronage system very well, because in my own context, we are also patrons. My family is a patronage family, but I understand what intentions do, and how, again, that's why I said it's the first intention. So, my grandfather was the only Black man who owned a performance space in Rhodesia in 1972. And so he was intentional about making sure that artists who were otherwise censored and silenced in white-owned spaces could speak freely in his space. So that's where I come from. And, for me now to be an artist, to be a composer who speaks freely, I mean, it's no accident. And so I really think that, I again come from a background where creativity, the creative arts, the voice has been such a big part of our national liberation, has been such a big part of our national healing, and will continue to be. Uh, I think that, thinking about the future of composers, yes, we must look at the living. And I also am somebody who has been, really so fortunate to have such an interesting life. Like I grew up in Zimbabwe. I moved to New Mexico for high school. Then I went to Princeton with Emily for college. And then I moved to New York and then spent time in Europe, etc. And for me, what brings me a lot of joy and excitement is my peers. And, when I think about my peers and those of us who are literally, about to be in the positions to run these institutions, I'm excited for what's to come. And the reality is change is already here. It's already here. And so when we talk about, what's the future has arrived. And I think that to me, that brings me a lot of joy. And I think it scares some people. But, for those who are afraid by the future looking like every single person on this Zoom call, check yourself. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Because we have existed since the beginning of time and, we're here. So I'm happy.
Well, yes. And I'm going to leave it on that note because we are out of time. And that was a wonderful way to finish out the evening. The future is here. We are here. We are here. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for Reimagine the Opera Canon. And I have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.